Creating an inclusive environment for Indigenous students requires sensitivity for special needs and knowledge about the Aboriginal culture. Teaching Aboriginal students requires a sense of relatedness to help them answer questions such as, who am I, where do I fit in, and where do I belong to? Australia has recognised the need to build better relationships with Indigenous communities and respecting their values and culture. The notion of reconciliation acknowledges the significance of Indigenous communities within Australia and is now being implemented in workplace communities, but in particular incorporating this within schools. In the last 5 years, the Department of Education and their project called the Aboriginal Perspectives Across the Curriculum project aims to assist all students to be able to look at the world from an Aboriginal viewpoint and understand the different Aboriginal points of view on a range of issues such as reconciliation, social justice, and equality. From now, this becomes the overarching reason as to why Aboriginal perspectives need to be implemented in schools because it widens children's knowledge about Australia's history and educating the vision of a unified Australia. Australia has a distinctive history that has helped form the culturally diverse nation it is today. As a result of our cultural and linguistic diversity, the Australian government shadowed international developments in relation to inclusive education policies. Inclusive education is an operational focus on the fundamental rights of children with English as a second language, developmental disabilities, diverse ethnic backgrounds, or socio-economic status, to enable them to actively participate and achieve equity in the education system. Equity in education endeavours to enable children to receive impartial and inclusive education in all aspects. To ensure disadvantaged children are able to develop skills and to cater for the needs of diverse learners, it requires educators to adapt, change, accommodate and support children to create a classroom environment that is fair and just for all students. Curriculum frameworks such as the Circle of Courage and the 8 Ways of Learning create an educational climate that supports social and emotional efficacy. Inclusion fundamentally indicates exclusion. Although inclusive education applies to all students, individual students with a cognitive, physical ability or cultural difference are more likely to be excluded. Inclusion should be an individual experience more so than classing certain groups as students. Inclusive education, therefore, is a process of responding to the uniqueness of individuals, increasing their sense of presence, access, participation and engagement in our learning society. To ensure we create a positive and engaging environment for children's development, we must have an understanding of exclusive education. So what does exclusion look like within the education system and in society? Exclusion from quality educational opportunities is often related to inequalities in society. Exclusion in education has many forms and expressions, such as exclusion from meaningful learning experiences, exclusion from education within a particular school, or exclusion from recognition of acquired learning. Indigenous students face educational and social challenges due to society focusing on Western cultures, perspectives, and ways of understanding, often excluding Indigenous perspectives. Therefore, when students do not see their own culture being recognised and valued in schools or the local community, they do not feel a sense of inclusion or belonging. Often society is guilty of criticising Aboriginal youth disadvantaged on their background and family orientation as the reason for their lack of representation in school. This is known as deficit discourse, which frames Indigenous identity in a narrative of negativity and disempowerment. When society's thinking, discussions and approaches are viewed in this way, it paints a picture that Indigenous culture is the problem. Deficit theory in regards to education refers to children who differ from the norm in a significant way are considered to be deficient. Therefore, strategies and educational processes should be applied to assist in correcting the deficiencies. I can honestly say I've unfortunately witnessed exclusion and deficit discourse during a placement last year. A teacher within the school blamed a young student's lack of self-confidence and behavioural issues on his cultural background. The child demonstrated low academic levels during regular testing and was disengaged during classroom activities. Therefore, the teacher made minimal effort to offer additional support for the child. I was fortunate enough to gain employment within the school after I completed my placement. I was able to work with this particular student one-on-one, and over time I built a trusting relationship with the student, which assisted the student in building confidence, completing classroom activities and achieving positive results in the school testing. This leads us to the meaning of normalisation and various ways to improve inclusiveness. Normalisation is a principle that aims for students with learning disabilities or disadvantages to experience normal patterns of everyday life. Rather than forcing students to conform to what society determines as normal, normalisation means making maximum use of the regular school system with a minimum resort to separate facilities. Therefore, it could be argued normalisation gave rise to the concept of integration. Normalisation does not recognise the wide range of individual differences within society or education. This leads to the question, what is normal? As well as what is the value of programs that ensure conformity to predetermined norm of behaviour. The development of normalisation becomes a problem when it is used as a measure of what society perceives as normal. Therefore, when someone demonstrates behavioural characteristics, they are viewed as abnormal and problematic. Rather than discriminating against or turning a blind eye on people's differences, we need to embrace diversity. Australia is currently in the process of converting to neoliberal education. Therefore, children are seen as consumers rather than students, and students' development curriculum is being modified to ensure they are educated to fit into a particular model that will benefit the economy. Education services have left behind the concept of theoretical reflection. Instead, they are placing a greater emphasis on status, reputation, and performance. An example of this is the NAPLAN testing. Risks associated with neoliberalism include limiting education to those who can afford it, performance over philosophical teaching, and placing additional pressure on low socioeconomic status people in society. Therefore, the question stands, what can be done to improve inclusiveness for Indigenous students in education and in the community? The 8 Ways of Learning is an Aboriginal pedagogy framework that expresses 8 interconnected pedagogies by connecting through shared stories, reflection of belonging through pictures, and using each other's ideas to create new knowledge. An example of active inclusive learning involves students engaging with material and applying these to real-life situations. The ABC chart resource shown was used when I was on placement, and it assisted Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal students to learn the alphabet and identify common aspects of Aboriginal culture. The ABC chart is versatile and can relate to many different learning experiences across the curriculum. The resource effectively uses integral learning outcomes and modifies it in a way that all students can relate. Albert Bandura believed the focus should not be on test scores, more so social efficacy, by viewing that pro-social behaviour interrelates with academic success. Specifically, this involves cooperating, helping, and sharing. I believe community involvement is the key to building strong relationships, which in turn contributes to inclusive and supportive education for all students. Through my experience of volunteer community involvement at Philly's Cafe at the Uniting Church, I was fortunate enough to be able to work with Indigenous students from Camilda College. The cafe is a great opportunity for the students to develop new relationships, which help acquire social skills and contribute to developing a solid support network. Inclusive systems assist in quality education and are instrumental in changing discriminatory attitudes. Respect and understanding flourish when students from diverse abilities and backgrounds socialise, learn, and play together. We need to disconnect from neoliberal education and focus on children's unique qualities, strengths, weaknesses, culture, background, and making connections with families. Through observing children in their social surroundings, educators can use life experiences to teach children about respect, diversity, and sympathy. To successfully move forward and create change, we must display culture sensitivity to different learning styles. Einstein said, "We can't solve today's problems using the same kind of thinking that created them." Therefore, as a community, we need to challenge people's assumptions, the way we frame issues, and shift our thinking to recognise and acknowledge the skills, strengths, and talent we all possess, regardless of our background, cognitive, or physical ability.